Okay, picture this, September 7th, 1191. We're on the sun-baked coast of the Holy Land, and a massive battle is about to go down. This battle would become a flawless tactical masterpiece, a victory so absolute it really should have changed the course of history. But it didn't. In fact, it did the exact opposite, and that leaves us with this incredible historical puzzle.
So yeah, this is the core question we're going to dig into. How does that even happen? It just seems impossible, right? Winning a battle so perfectly that it ends up costing you the entire war. But the story of the Battle of Arsuf is, well, it's a masterclass in the brutal ironies of warfare. And it all comes down to this number, 17. Kind of seems random, doesn't it? But what if I told you that 17 is the number of minutes, just 17 minutes, that it took for Richard the Lionheart's armored cavalry to completely shatter the largest army the legendary Saladin had ever put on a battlefield? That's right, 17 minutes. It was this absolute whirlwind of steel and fury that cemented Richard's legend forever. But in a bizarre twist, it's also what sealed the fate of the Third Crusade. And to really get how that's possible, we have to rewind a bit, to the hours right before that famous charge, to a moment of just pure desperation. You see, before all the glory, things were pretty much hell on earth. Richard the Lionheart and his army, they weren't marching to some glorious battle. Oh no. They were marching straight through a death trap, with the deep blue sea on one side and an entire hostile empire on the other. It's honestly hard to wrap your head around just how awful this was. Imagine a line of 20,000 soldiers stretching out for 12 miles. It's so long it would take a messenger on a fast horse 2 hours just to ride from the front to the back. They're marching in 110-degree heat. Knights were literally cooking alive inside their armor. And to make matters worse, Saladin's forces were poisoning all the wells up ahead. This wasn't a march. It was a brutal, grueling test of survival. And on top of all that, the odds were just terrible. Richard has 20,000 completely exhausted men. Saladin? He's got 30,000 fresh warriors, and that includes 12,000 Turkish horse archers. We're talking the best in the world. Guys who could literally turn the sky black with arrows. Richard's objective was simple, just survive and get his army to the port city of Jaffa. Saladin's objective was even simpler, total annihilation. But see, Saladin wasn't just fighting with brute force. He was a master of psychological warfare. Every single morning, the Crusaders would wake up to the thunder of war drums echoing from the hills around them. Every night, they'd see these signal fires, watching the enemy coordinate movements just out of sight. He was breaking them down hour by hour before a single sword had even been drawn. So after hours of this constant physical and mental torment, that legendary Crusader discipline, it was just about to snap. And when it did, it unleashed 17 minutes of carnage that would change military history forever. I mean, just try to get the scene in your head. For 3 solid hours, Saladin's horse archers are circling the Crusader column like vultures, unleashing a staggering 30,000 arrows every minute. It's a literal steel hailstorm. Knights are watching their friends, their horses just getting pincushioned with arrows. But Richard's orders are absolute. Hold the formation. Do not charge. The pressure, especially on the Knights Hospitaller holding the rear, was becoming unbearable. And this is the moment it all breaks. A knight, Brother Baldwin of Cairo, sees his comrades being slaughtered around him, and he just snaps. He screams this line, spurs his horse, and charges, all by himself, straight into the enemy ranks. It wasn't a tactic. It was an act of pure, uncontrollable rage, and it was about to trigger an avalanche. Now, this moment should have been a complete disaster, but this is where Richard the Lionheart proves why he's a legend. In that split second, he doesn't panic. He seizes the chaos. He sounds his war horn, but not for a messy free-for-all charge. No, he signals a disciplined, coordinated attack, using these pre-planned wedge formations of knights. It was revolutionary. Instead of a brawl, he unleashed what were basically armored thunderbolts that punched right through the middle of Saladin's army. In just 17 minutes, the battle is over. A total unbelievable victory. But right there, in that moment of absolute triumph, Richard makes a decision that is going to cost him everything. And look, the results were just staggering. The Crusaders lost maybe 700 men. Saladin lost 7,000 warriors, and that included 32 of his top commanders. His army, which everyone thought was invincible, was utterly broken and fleeing in chaos. This wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. And then, the unthinkable happens. As his knights are getting ready to chase down the last remnants of Saladin's army, maybe even capture or kill Saladin himself and end the war right then and there, Richard raises his banner and sounds the signal to halt. He calls the whole thing off. The big question is, why?
Well, because he was facing an impossible choice. Option 1, pursue. The reward, the potential end of the entire war. The risk? His knights and their horses were exhausted, and a long chase could easily turn into a deadly trap. Option 2, secure the battlefield. The reward here was Saladin's baggage train, a fortune in gold and vital supplies. The risk? Saladin gets away with 8,000 men to rebuild his army. Richard chose the sure thing over the massive gamble.
And the fallout from that one fateful choice, it was immense. Because by winning the battle so decisively, Richard had just given his enemy a perfect lesson on how to win the war.
So what happens next? Well, Richard gets to Jaffa, which was his immediate goal, mission accomplished there. But Saladin learned the most important lesson of his entire life at Arsuf. You do not fight Richard's heavy cavalry in an open battle. Ever. So he immediately changed his entire strategy. No more big set-piece battles. Instead, he started a war of attrition. Just endless raids, ambushes, cutting supply lines. And Richard's army, this perfect weapon designed for one decisive charge, was now totally useless against an enemy who simply refused to fight him.
You know, there's a term for this, a Pyrrhic victory. It's a win that costs you so much it basically feels like a loss. But Arsuf was special. The devastating cost wasn't measured in Richard's own casualties. It was measured in the priceless strategic lesson he gave his enemy for free. And here's the brutal math behind that idea. Those 700 Crusaders who died, they were elite, heavily armored, professional knights. Years of training, huge expense. They were basically irreplaceable. Saladin's 7,000 dead, most were infantry and light cavalry drawn from a massive empire. He could replace them in a few months. Richard won the day, but he was losing a war of resources that he could never, ever win. Now, even though the battle was a strategic loss for the Crusade, its tactical lessons were so brilliant they echoed for centuries. Richard's whole approach, the disciplined charge, the wedge formations, it literally became the textbook for European armies for the next 300 years. And even today, military academies from West Point to Sandhurst still study the Battle of Arsuf as a perfect lesson in execution and timing. So in the end, the ultimate cruel irony of Arsuf is that the victory was simply too perfect. It was such a tactical masterclass that it gave Saladin a brutal, unforgettable education. By showing off his greatest strength so completely, Richard taught his enemy to never, ever let him use that strength again. And that's why Jerusalem would ultimately remain out of his grasp. And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? Was Richard the Lionheart's incredible, undeniable genius on the battlefield the very thing that made it impossible for him to win the war? A perfect victory that led, tragically, to a strategic defeat.